For many of us, the early 90s were a time of allegiances. Mario, which had been riding the giant Nintendo wave of popularity in the 80s, had finally run into a rival. For Mario's famous jumping and coin gathering, his rival was given immense speed, rings, and emeralds, which gave him super abilities. The battle lines had been drawn, Nintendo against Sega. Where did you stand? It was among gaming's greatest rivalries, but then Sega tried to get a bit too fancy with its mascot. A failed console and a litany of horrible games later, this awesome character was reduced to a laughingstock, ultimately resulting in Nintendo winning the war. However, almost 2 decades after his last major 2D game on the Sega Genesis, he would finally begin a return to prominence. This is Sonic the Hedgehog, and we celebrate his 20th anniversary right here on Downloadable Content. Welcome, one and all. This is Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and we are joined by Nick and Danielle.
Hello.
Hello.
And it is an all-Sonic episode. Yes, he turns 20 years old this year, having come out first on the Sega Genesis in 1991.
I was around when it came out.
Yeah, I was...
God, I'm old.
I was 6.
So was I.
I was, 1991? Yeah, I was 6.
We're all old.
Yep, 6.
I'm gonna need a cane soon.
Yeah, not as spry as I was when I was 24.
Hey, we can remember the good days.
Yeah. Back when there were 8 and 16 bits, and we liked it!
Thank you, Cranky Kong.
You're welcome. Anytime.
But yes, Sonic the Hedgehog turns 20 years, and we've seen a rise and fall, and raking across coals, and crucifixion, and the poor guy has been through a lot.
He has.
He was supposed to be the answer to Nintendo's giant wall of popularity in the form of Mario. And for a while it was. For a while, Sega had very successfully cut into Nintendo's market share in the early 90s, gaining about half of Nintendo's base. It was like the video game industry was like one giant risk board, Nintendo and Sega battling for supremacy.
With other smaller companies like Atari just sitting on the sidelines trying to get in, but...
Yeah, well, once Atari had E.T. bomb, that was it. Game over.
Well, they tried again with the Jaguar. You gotta give them points for perseverance.
Yeah, which was popular for all of 3 weeks. The Atari Jaguar and the Lynx don't deserve... and the Virtual Boy do not deserve credit in this conversation.
No, I'm sorry.
They shouldn't have... No. Just no.
No. This is Sonic.
No.
All Sonic, all the time. But yes, he turns 20, and finally, he's starting to return to a bit of a relevance, I should say. I mean, I jumped into the Sonic series with Sonic 2. That was, I remember the commercials in the early 90s. You know, Sega does what Nintendo don't. What? Hey, Dan, that's a pun out of your book, Danielle.
Yeah, I know. Quit stealing my material.
Why aren't you collecting royalties?
I know. Give me a nickel.
But I remember in the glory days of the Genesis and the Sega Channel, where I was first exposed to Sonic the Hedgehog.
You shouldn't say it that way.
Yes, when Sonic lifted up his blue fur and exposed himself to me. No.
You didn't have to.
But I mean, you guys remember the rivalry that was
Oh,
present
yeah.
in the early 90s.
And there was no middle ground. You were Nintendo or you were Sega. There was no I like both of them. No.
Yeah, it was kind of like the Yankees and Red Sox. You have to like one or the other. You couldn't like Nintendo or Sega at the same time. I mean, these were the battle lines. You were either for Mario and his woohoo, and or Sonic.
Team Nintendo.
You know.
Although I did appreciate it.
So we will go right into the chat of Sonic's 20th. Let's hop back into our time machine, pile into the TARDIS, and head back into 91.
Okay, Doc.
Yeah!
Head into the TARDIS. Let's go back to 1991. Sonic the Hedgehog 1 had come out for the Genesis.
It was a simpler time.
Yes. Marked by naked gold women.
Marked by naked gold women. Did I miss something?
I think you and me both.
Yeah, that's easy to do. But
Never mind.
But when it came out, when Sonic the Hedgehog 1 hit the Genesis, it was a commercial and critical success. Suddenly, Nintendo's iron grip on the video game industry began to shake a little. It had an average review score of 9 out of 10. Did very, very well, and started introducing us to the concepts of breakneck speed, for one.
Mm-hmm.
And promptly dying afterwards.
You know, Mario was already well known for jumping. Jumping, scaling huge distances.
And breaking things with his head and his ass.
91, I don't know if Mario had the ass stomp at that point.
At that point, 91, Mario 3 had just come out, so he was tail whipping things.
He was tail whipping things, but his ass wasn't fully developed. He couldn't break things.
Thanks for that mental image, Brian. I really appreciate it.
It's fully developed rump.
His ass hadn't developed to the point where it could break open blocks and question blocks yet. We hadn't had the pixels for it yet.
Like I said, it was a simpler time.
Yes.
Can I just go back to my memories of Tanuki? Wait, wrong series here.
Wrong series. But, so, Sega wanted to try to do something that was not Mario. Somebody a bit cooler, a bit hipper, a bit faster.
Hipper!
Someone for our age.
Yeah.
For our,
Somebody cool and...
Because that was the time. It was the early 90s. Everything had to be hip.
Well, in the early 90s, really, we were still in the 80s. There was still big hair.
Pastels.
Yeah, the 90s didn't really adopt an identity of their own until around the middle of the decade.
And something happened as the 90s was coming in, and the major gaming population was getting older, and hence why Sonic kind of fit with more of the demographic, because it was a brand new image.
That was very, very true. I mean, it was something the gaming industry hadn't seen before. To that point, you had Atari,
and their abysmal titles.
Well, not to start. Not to start.
Well, not to start, but well.
I mean, then Nintendo came along. I mean, obviously you had other things like ColecoVision and things like that. Nintendo came along with its whole Italian plumber. Your princess is in Other Castle, and now the gaming industry needed something new. Hence Sonic, big blue guy, runs faster than your console can allow.
Hence the prompt dying I mentioned earlier. Because you didn't see that one barrier just crush Sonic like a twig.
Which is why you had to have the dexterity of, someone on speed.
Oh yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog introduced gamers to the concept of lightning quick reflexes.
Which, upped the challenge level.
It did, because things now were moving a lot faster.
Yeah.
And they introduced a villain that at the time was
Scary as fuck.
That seemed more competent than Mario's Bowser.
Yeah.
Very true, Dr. Robotnik.
Which, at that point, he had already managed to capture the animals and,
Yeah, at that point, he's already succeeded, for the most part.
Yeah, he wasn't... Dr. Robotnik was not the inept bad guy as Bowser.
Exactly.
He was...
In the early Sonic cartoons, God, that man was scary.
He was and still is scary. I mean...
No, nowadays...
Now he's funny.
Nowadays, he's a bit of a tool, but...
Well, depending on where you look at it, but... Still, the cover to Sonic 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very true. But...
No eyes.
But it was just an interesting concept. Also, you had the introduction of the concept of not necessarily dying as soon as you get hit by an enemy. Whereas in the case of Mario, if you were big and you got hit by an enemy, you'd shrink, and the next time you got hit, you died. Sonic, you had the idea of rings, where as long as Sonic had one ring, the only way he could die was that he would fall down a bottomless pit.
Yep.
We've done that way too many times.
Get crushed.
Done that way too many times.
Or drown.
Done that way too many times. Even more than the first two combined.
So this
freaking labyrinth.
This introduced
Casino Night Zone.
This introduced us to the concept where, as long as Sonic had one ring in his possession, he could keep going pretty much endlessly. Like the
Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, great. Thanks for stealing that joke.
So, I will now turn the floor over to you guys. Nick, you've played Sonic 1. What was your experience playing Sonic 1 as a kid?
Well, let's see. Sonic 1, I actually got Sonic 1 and 2 at the same time. It was part of a combo rental by my parents. Sonic 1 was just... It was something completely different. It was not the concept of Mario just, well, I guess it was a lot of platforming, but the goal was to do it as fast as possible. And the game rewarded you for that, and it was just something completely different. You were never rewarded for speed running, and just merely jumping could kill pretty much everything, as Sonic turned into a big spike ball, essentially. And it just was something very, very different. And again, being the Nintendo fanboy, I appreciated Mario and his wealth of power-ups over Sonic's speed and invincibility almost, as long as you had a ring. But I appreciated it nonetheless.
Well, Sonic 2 had its own share of power-ups, especially in the first game. You had the shield.
Mm-hmm.
Ubiquitously useful.
Yep. You also had the temporary boost to his speed. The boot, or the shoe, I should say.
The shoe. I called it Hot Foot.
The Hot Foot. And again, the brief periods of invincibility, not unlike Mario's Star.
That
Only
lasted
you didn't have
longer.
to chase it down.
That's true.
Yeah, with the possibility of it being beyond your grasp or falling into a pit.
Or my favorite in Mario 3, when the star went in the other direction.
Yes, all of Sonic's power-ups were contained in nice, neat boxes, which didn't move. They were there.
You could roll into them, you could jump on them.
Danielle, describe your experiences with Sonic. I know you love the blue hedgehog.
Oh, I do. And mainly it's
Positively and decently so.
that's called bestiality.
And on that note,
Go on, Danielle.
Well, I didn't have as much of an experience with Mario or, Nintendo games in general growing up. So when, in my family at least, we started off with the Master System. That was my first experience with Sega. And I remember early on, one of my first Christmas presents was getting a Sega Genesis with Sonic 2. And Sonic 1, shortly thereafter. And that really shaped up my whole gaming experience because there was this character that I thought was cool, fast, fun. He was something that, we could easily, get into. But it wasn't so much that, you would be alienated from playing, over and over again. But I don't know, growing up, that was the thing.
something that Sonic had over Mario, as I found out over the years, was Sonic was always more difficult. I don't know if that was the speed factor that kicks in, or if
the level layout.
Or if it was the level layout or the enemies, but I always had Sonic always proved to be a harder experience and therefore more enjoyable when you did conquer the game.
Yeah, and not only that, but there were other ways to finish a level. You didn't always have to choose the linear path. Unlike with Mario, at least in my experience, I don't play a whole lot of it, but at least with Sonic, there were other ways, if you fell down one pit and it led you somewhere else, there was always multiple paths.
Right.
And it always made it more of the replay value went up.
Especially considering that Sonic had something that Mario did not, and that was the bonus stage, special stage.
Yeah, and that always, made it a little more fun.
Which, while Mario's objective was to clear worlds so that he could eventually get to the princess, Sonic had to collect Chaos Emeralds, which were obtained by way of these special stages. You needed a certain amount of rings, or you just needed to find the one giant ring hidden in a wall or at the end of a level.
As we got later on in the series.
Right.
Yes, I agree.
So, while Sonic 1 was a groundbreaking title and finally gave Mario some competition, we moved on to Sonic 2, which was released a year later in 1992, which actually was more of a financial and critical success than the first game. Sonic 2 average scores range from around between 9 and 9.5, and for many, this was the game that I first played. This was the Sonic that I first played, and I loved it, despite never being able to get past Chemical Plant Zone early on.
Oh, you suck.
Despite
Oil Ocean.
Oil Ocean's awesome.
I could never.
I die so much there.
I could never, for years, I could never get past Act 2 of the Chemical Plant Zone.
Wow.
Because once the sewage started rising, that was it.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, and that offered one other mechanic that Mario had that Sonic didn't, and made the game a lot harder, was Sonic can't swim. And Sonic needs air like everyone else.
Yeah, like Mario.
The Hedgehog, they weren't meant for swimming, so that's kind of realistic.
Yeah.
True enough.
Although Mario never had to come up for air at all.
Yeah, that's inhuman. At least Sonic had.
Out.
Yeah, Mario never had to come up for air. Until you got to the later Mario games, where Nintendo went, "Oh wait, he has lungs, not gills."
Oh shit, he's human.
No shit. But Sonic 2 was a great game. It also introduced Tails.
Everybody's lovable two-tailed fox.
It introduced Tails, and in Sonic 2, introduced for the first time, essentially a co-op sort of thing. Where even if you were playing on the one-player mode, somebody with a second Genesis controller could control Tails.
Which was always fun, considering that me and my sister were always attached at the hit back then. It's like, hey, you know what? Let's do this.
I mean, it was great if you had a second player to play with, although I found if you were playing by yourself, Tails was an annoyance, especially on the special stage.
Oh, yeah.
He's a jerk.
Like the rings!
Yeah.
And then Tails would just go, what's that black thing? I think I'm going to explore it with my face!
Yeah, and then you'd lose rings, and you'd miss the Chaos Emerald by 1 ring because Tails didn't get out of the way fast enough.
Yep.
Mind that bomb splat, that sort of thing. But I spent so many hours playing the multiplayer in Sonic 2 because it was a racing mode.
You and I battled forever on those.
Well, it was great because I thought it was such a unique concept because yes, it was you and a second player competing to see who'd complete the board the quickest, but just because you crossed the finish line first didn't automatically meant that you won. Exactly. You were graded on 5 different criteria, and if you had successfully more in 3 of those 5 categories than your opponent, then you won. So, sometimes crossing the line first didn't necessarily translate into success, and I spent many hours playing against my sister, and if she had 11 seconds left, then you'd start hearing the probably one of the most memorable gaming tunes of all time, the 11 seconds until you drown.
Oh god, that gives me nightmares to this day. I get claustrophobic if I hear that. I feel like I'm drowning.
Even to this day, my sister throws the controller at me, like, you do it! 11 seconds, and then, game. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I hated that. And it was like, every time I heard that particular tune, I'm like, oh shit, where's the air bubble?
Yeah,
I know.
You panic immediately.
Yeah.
I mean,
sick.
You panic even more than Mario's only 100 seconds left.
Yeah.
Even more than
Yeah, then now it's this evil like and it gets faster and faster and you're just like ah!
And then you just see him as he just falls just sinks in the water. Past the ground. Who the hell knows how that works?
Time
Killed
over.
Sonic. You happy now?
Time over. Also, and I forgot to mention, I mean, yes, you had a bit of a time limit in Mario. You had only X number of Mario seconds, because those weren't real seconds, to beat the board. In each Sonic level, you had 10 minutes.
Yep.
And, depending on some of those boards took almost the full length of time.
Sandopolis, definitely.
Oh, now we're going to Sonic 3. Almost had Mario
but
there for a minute.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Sonic 3 comes out in 1994, as does Sonic and Knuckles. At this point, we start seeing a bit of a decline in the critical reception for Sonic. I mean, both.
What are you talking about?
I actually looked up review scores for these games. So
okay, review scores, but the public opinion was the biggest game.
You didn't let me finish my sentence.
I'm sorry. Please continue.
Wait till I finish before you jump all over me with a rebuttal.
Rebuttal from the south.
According to critical review, these 2 games, Sonic 3 and Sonic Knuckles, weren't as high. They scored around 8.5, both games. Commercial success, so, I mean, they both enjoyed huge sales, just like the previous 2 games. So, I mean, public perception hadn't really faded. I mean, these were great games. And then, of course, you had the nice little innovation for the Genesis, where you could play both Sonic 3 and Knuckles at once. I forget what I forget what the device was called.
I think it was called the 32X.
Yes, it was. It was called the Sega 32X. And this little thing that you plugged into your Genesis, and you could play both games at once. Wait a
minute. You're talking about the 32X and Knuckles Chaotix. Sonic and Knuckles had the lock-on feature in itself.
Right.
Okay, yes,
you're right. Yep.
You're jumping the gun.
Just a little.
A little bit.
Yeah, but I still have my copies. And Sonic and Knuckles had itself the lock-on feature where you could play Sonic 3 and Sonic Knuckles or Sonic 2.
Because now with the advent of this, you can now play a Sonic game that was essentially double the length of any of its previous versions. Because once you finish Sonic 3, then you go right into Sonic and Knuckles. Also, these games had for the first time the ability to save.
Yes.
Which was useful.
For the very first time, these games had the ability to save. Unlike Sonic 1 and 2, where you had to do all or nothing.
Yeah, I have a pretty good story about that, too.
Well, go right ahead.
Well, as we all know or have read from Sonic comic books, Sonic loves chili dogs, right? Well, during the initial stages of trying to finish off Sonic 2, my sister and I had to pause the game for quite an extended period of time because we didn't want to lose at the last stage because our mom forced us to go eat dinner. So imagine having to keep the Genesis on for maybe like an hour on that last stage because you couldn't save it.
Oh, I mean, we all experienced that, especially in the days of Super Mario Brothers. I mean, you've played for several hours getting to World 8, and you were getting called to dinner, and you're like, no way am I turning this game off.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes you'd come back and the game either froze or blanked out or...
Exactly.
Whatever.
It's to hell.
But with these games, you could save, and it was relief. I'm like, oh, thank God. We finally got to a Genesis cartridge where you could actually save your game. So after Sonic and Knuckles came out, we move on to
don't forget about the most important thing about Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. It was the addition of Knuckles.
Yes, very true.
I think you kind of glossed over that.
Well, who cares about Knuckles?
It's like, oh yeah, that other character.
I never played as Knuckles. Never.
I played him a few times, especially for his gliding abilities. That did come in handy.
Yeah, I mean, Knuckles to me is that other interloper in the Sonic series. I mean, yes, Knuckles had the ability. Yes, now that the memory is flooding back, Nick. Knuckles did have the unique ability to glide and climb up walls, which opened up a whole new avenue of gameplay.
Especially if you're playing with him in Sonic 2.
Yes, if you had that fun feature.
Yep.
Yep, I wouldn't know because I had Sonic 3 and Knuckles on PC. No. So...
Regardless, the addition of Knuckles did help to, now you're able to explore areas of zones where you couldn't even get to as Sonic. I mean, obviously as Tails you could fly up there, but you couldn't scale walls like Knuckles could.
Yeah, but even then, Tails had the, he tired out.
Yes, Tails would tire out after, a few seconds.
Yeah, so if you couldn't if you couldn't get Tails to get up that wall, obviously you're gonna go get Knuckles.
Mm-hmm. Well, still, I always considered Knuckles as that interloper, so...
Don't be hating. Don't be just a haterade, Brian.
I always stuck to True Blue. I also bring up that came out in 1993 before Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You had Sonic CD.
Yep, with the addition of Amy Rose.
Sonic CD, which came out for, obviously, the Sega CD and Saturn. That was also reviewed very well. Sonic CD had average review score of about 8. That was one of the titles I avoided simply because I didn't have Sega CD or Saturn. Then Sonic would make its first attempt into the 3D realm, not really a true 3D. It made for Sonic 3D Blast.
That was fun, though.
It was a fun game, but it's here where we start seeing a bit of a decline.
Yeah.
You know, by this point, now we're in 1996. Sonic is starting to look a little bit old hat.
Mario 64 was out at the time.
Oh yes, and
Yes.
Mario had reinvented itself again. Yes, Mario had a very successful entry into the 3D realm, whereas Sega tried to emulate that success and really didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it still got a pretty decent review score, but, you know, 7.25. But here's where we start seeing its decline. Then along comes the Dreamcast. But we will continue that discussion. The demise of Sonic.
Oh.
Or at least the knocking down, pummeling, ass-thrashing, beating, flummoxing, and otherwise drawing and quartering of Sonic. In our second half of the All Sonic Chat, you're listening to Downloadable Content. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Love Fest that is Sonic the Hedgehog here on Downloadable Content. We continue our discussion, our reminiscence, our never-ending nostalgia for one of gaming's most well-known characters. Sonic, however, was not like anyone else, really. Sonic did have its low points, but for Sonic, it would seem that his low period was an exceptionally long one. You know, he was still doing pretty well on the Genesis and on the Saturn. But, you know, when it got to the Dreamcast, Sonic would start to embark on a period of falling that would occur over the span of several years and a few generations of consoles. the two Sonic Adventure games, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, did have they were pretty well received. You know, they got average scores of about 8.5. It was Sonic's real, I would call it probably his very first real attempt at 3D. I had briefly played the first Sonic Adventure game for the Dreamcast, and I was like, alright, not bad. Although, for somebody who had been playing Sonic's 2D games for a decade, almost a decade up to that point, seeing Sonic in 3D and having to navigate Sonic's famous speed with a 3D environment proved to be a little jarring, I felt.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you there. The main issue was really the camera, and it's an issue Sega still pretty much to this day still hasn't fixed, where it just can't keep up with Sonic's speed, and a game that was more for the speed just couldn't.
Well, one of the other problems that I had when I started playing the Adventure series is that not just the camera but the controls. The Dreamcast controller, I should say, wasn't really well known to be a really good controller. And if you had made one move, like one misstep, Sonic would just shoot off in one direction at breakneck speed and eventually get you killed.
Yeah, but not to kind of hark on that a little. That's really more of a Dreamcast problem rather than an actual Sonic problem. Another thing that really didn't make Sonic Adventure that great was the addition of so many characters. Not only did we have Sonic, but we had Tails, we had Knuckles, with all their own unique storylines. Then we went Amy Rose, Big the Cat. Some of these characters that, well, personally for me, this was the first time I ever saw Amy Rose or Big the Cat. I don't know where the hell those two came from. And it just it lost interest for me because I wasn't playing as Sonic. You could play him for 10 stages and then that's it.
Well, there was that other character too, that robot.
Oh yeah, I forgot about him. What was he, Gamma something or other?
Yeah, I think that was the nickname. He had like E something or other.
Yeah, I think they just called him Gamma for short to save us all a headache.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I mean, you get the 10 stages or whatever, of Sonic, but then you're forced to play every other character in every other stage in order to continue.
In order to really get that true ending, the one that you were trying to get from moment one.
Yeah, but the biggest problem was nobody, or at least in my experience, could not finish Big Stage.
I was one of. Then I would count myself as one of the few.
Good, because I never could.
So,
I beat the whole game, start to finish, all the power-ups, 100%. But let me tell you, it wasn't without very frustrating moments of me wanting to punch something very hard.
So I think that it sounds like that not being able to play as Sonic throughout the whole game kind of detracted.
Yeah.
And that problem wasn't fixed in the next game either. Sonic Adventure 2, sure, there was Sonic, but a lot of it was playing other characters not named Sonic.
Wasn't it Sonic wasn't it when Sonic finally got to the Dreamcast that they changed the name of Robotnik to Eggman?
Yes.
No.
No?
He was referred to as Eggman back on the Saturn in
Really?
Sonic 3 Blast.
I mean, I first noticed the change to Eggman in Sonic Adventure.
I think that's a lot of people what a lot of people noticed, but it was eventually, and actually I found this out in a exclusive interview that Eggman.
Oh, you had an exclusive interview with who?
I didn't, but I was watching about it. Come on, me knowing someone high up, please.
Hey, I've met Yuji Naka, so.
But there was I was watching it and they said that Eggman was actually originally meant as a joke. That line Eggman was just there as a joke, but everyone took it. He took it so well that was received in some manner or fashion that they decided to keep it.
Okay.
Eggman is still his nickname. You know, Robotnik is still his actual name if you read the Sonic 4 storyline, which I have had the pleasure of reading. But, you know, everyone just refers to him as Eggman, which is stupid if you ask me.
Well, it makes sense. Yeah, it's a joke. He does resemble an egg in most of his illustrations.
Yeah, I mean, at first I was confused though when I picked up Sonic Adventure, and they made a reference to Eggman. I'm like, who's Eggman? Where's Robotnik? Who's this Eggman guy?
See that? And I don't know if it's just you guys, but I always knew that. But then again, I was knee deep into the comic books and just about everything else Sonic related at the time.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of touched base on the comic books, but I stopped that right around the time we were heading into the Saturn era, so yeah, I probably wouldn't know that.
Right.
Yeah, it just didn't faze me at all.
Yeah, well, regardless, Eggman was what we got. Then we'd start moving into another game, Sonic Heroes. Released for the GameCube, the PS2, and the Xbox in 2003.
Well, probably should be another big bulletin we should go over about Sonic Adventure 2. I mean, we touched base upon it a little bit, but they introduced the concept of Sonic having a rival.
Yeah.
All right, elaborate.
Well, we were introduced. Well, Sonic Adventure 2, there were two teams: the Hero Team and the Dark Team, and we were introduced to Shadow the Hedgehog, which is basically like Sonic in every way, shape, and form, except he had jet boots.
Well, he had harnessed powers of the Chaos Emeralds too.
Yeah, that too. I guess I forgot that detail, but he could control the chaos, power of the Chaos Emeralds. You could even do it to a small extent without having an emerald.
Yeah, and then you've got the Bat, and who else?
Rouge. Yeah, and then I think Gamma again.
Yeah.
And Rouge was just basically another bounty hunter.
Well, she was just essentially another female Knuckles. She could dig, she could fly.
Well, you know what? It wasn't Gamma for the third character. It was Eggman. Eggman was the third in that bot pilot.
Yes, that's right. Because they had to have it so there was Sonic and Shadow, Rouge and Knuckles, and then Tails and Robotnik.
Right. And they just followed a lot of the same issues. You only played as, the main character, the actual Speed character, only so many times, 3 to 4 times per storyline.
And which also further detracted from the Sonic gameplay we had all come to love. Especially when you start getting into some of Sonic's spin-offs where he really took a nosedive. Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic...
Well, yeah.
Suddenly you have the introduction of gun-wielding hedgehogs. Then you have...
motorcycles.
Then you have, Sonic in King Arthur's court.
Oh, well, let's go. The abomination before that, Secret Rings.
Sonic and the Secret Rings. All of these games were horribly panned by
Sonic Riders. Ugh.
All these games were so horribly panned by critics, and it showed in game sales. Introducing guns and swords into the series. Now we're just bordering on the ridiculous.
But there's something we're also forgetting is all the advanced games that came out before that.
And to the credit...
To be honest, those Sonic Advance games were pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, they were. I did have the pleasure of playing the first one. I haven't played the second or the third, but that did go back to the Sonic roots.
Yeah, and that's something...
You could play as other characters, and that it was kind of a letdown, but it went back to the core mechanics of what Sonic really was.
Exactly, yes. And I think it did, and a lot of people are forgetting that when we got wind
before, people were forgetting about these games, saying, "Oh yeah, they haven't done this for years and years." And it's like, well, they kind of did. It was on a smaller scale, but we have something.
It was something.
It wasn't big, but it was still fun.
That's very true. Sonic Advance, as I remember it now, I remember it being notable for the fact that not only was it both, it was the first Sonic game on a Nintendo system.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the first?
Sonic Advance was the first Sonic game
One of those, at least,
on a Nintendo system.
Sonic Adventure 2 Battle might have beaten it out. No, it didn't. Okay, yeah, you're right.
Sonic Advance was the first Sonic game on a Nintendo system, thus ending the war between Nintendo and Sega. Nintendo had won game, set, and match. And this is how bad Sonic had fallen, was that it had to cede to the other side. I mean, yes, Sonic Advance did very well. It averaged between an 8 and 9 on most review sites, most review magazines. I don't know how it sold. I don't know what the commercial success of the game was. Probably at this point, the game
it was mediocre at best.
Probably at this point, the gaming public had seen just how many bad Sonic games had been released and stayed away from it on principle.
And
it kind of flew under the radar.
It did. It was not marketed very well.
Well, I mean, also by this
it wasn't.
Also by this time, Sega had pulled out of the console market.
Yeah, they went from a game system making company to just a game making company. They lost staff, they lost money, they lost so much at that point. They were just trying to stay on their feet.
Yeah, at this point, after the failure of the Dreamcast, Sega was just whoring out its characters to the highest bidder.
Well, it wasn't so much a whoring out as in. I don't think the Dreamcast was a failure.
That's your opinion. The Sonic Advance games were a bit of a return to the old Sonic games that we'd known and loved. But again, I think even though they reviewed well, they suffered a lack of sales due to the fact that by this point, several bad Sonic games had come out. It wasn't marketed very well, obviously.
So there's a bit of a stigma attached to it.
Yeah, it was already, by this point, it almost seemed like it was too little too late.
Yeah, I mean, Sonic had already fallen so hard and so fast that it was going to take a long effort to bring Sonic back to prominence. I mean, unfortunately, Nintendo has, by and large, had a lot of success putting Mario in different environments. That same success never translated well to the Sonic franchise.
Because at the time, we really just wanted Sonic back in his old element. That's really what the fans craved, but to do something like that, to go back to the old days of Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, the game wouldn't last very long. And Sega was going to have a hard time trying to push a $50 game out for something that was going to last a couple of hours at best.
True, but to further elaborate, as I just said, Nintendo put Mario in many different sort of scenarios. They've made party games, they've made sports games with Mario, they've made RPGs with Mario. Why is putting Sonic in these types of settings, why didn't that translate to the same amount of success?
It might be just because they don't have the right kind of team to back it up.
So you think that Sega just didn't have the staff nor the creativity to successfully pull something like that off.
Well, I think so, because if you look at the development teams behind them, they're jumping ships like every other game. It seems there's always some kind of different development team behind the next Sonic game. That nothing seems consistent. And even if you look at some of the characters, their backgrounds are shifting in some of the games.
And don't forget that Sega tried a complete hard reboot with Sonic the Hedgehog, what we refer to as Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, where it was almost like a hard reboot that just failed miserably.
That was probably great that you bring that up, Nick. That was probably, at least in the review scores, at least in terms of critical review, that was probably Sonic's lowest point. Sonic the Hedgehog, again, as you said, was a hard reboot. This game came out in 2006 for the 360 and the PlayStation 3, and the average review score was between a 4 and a 5. Just abysmal.
It hurts.
I've honestly been longing to get a copy and play it for myself, but I have not.
It was so bad that Sega delisted the game. It's no longer in print.
Yet you could still find it at the Target. Yep. I know this.
I've seen it.
It was so bad that, Sega washed its hands of it. They said no.
But then let's look at the next game that they decided to come out with, which was Sonic Unleashed. Which they had the right concept. They looked at God of War, took some notes, and then came out with this kind of duality system, and the Werehog system made sense in that it offered length. It was just, that's not what we wanted.
Funnily enough, the reboot of Sonic the Hedgehog got an average review of about a 5 out of 10. Sonic Unleashed for the Wii, it came out on every system, Wii, PS2, PS3, and 360 in 2008, and the Wii version got the best review of the bunch.
Really? The 360, in my opinion, was the best of the bunch, but that's just me.
The Wii version was the best reviewed. The reason why the other versions failed so badly, the general thread among them was a horrible control scheme.
Okay.
That's just from the research. The Wii version got the best of rest review, averaging about a 7. All the others got around a 5.
And just for controls alone.
That was partially to blame.
I don't know. The control scheme for the 360 version, I can only speak for the 360 version, was very tight. It actually was one of those things where that you could tell that Sega was onto something. That they had the right idea, they just didn't execute it perfectly. And as we saw it a couple of years later, that this was finally the sign of the times was changing. It was close but not quite, is what I was trying to say.
Well, I mean, it still continued the long string of bad Sonic games. It was reaching a point, and it already reached the point, to be perfectly honest, where anytime a Sonic game was announced, the gaming population would just be like, "Oh, all right."
It was more of a collective groan.
Yeah, it really was.
It was kind of the same sort of groan anytime EA announced a movie-based video game.
Yeah, pretty much. It was more of, what are they doing with Sonic this time?
But seeing Unleashed, you could tell that that Sega had an idea, because around the time Unleashed was being released, downloadable content was starting to become very popular, and you could just see the gears turning. So next year, in 2009, we got the next Sonic, which Sega promised would be a more traditional Sonic game.
Sonic Colors ended up coming out in 2010 to much better reviews this time around.
Actually, I was talking about the one before that, but go ahead.
I'm talking about Sonic Colors now.
You got it.
You didn't complete your segue, so I stole it from you.
We just jumped the cable. No big deal.
I'm going to Sonic Colors, which was just released last year, which starts what I think is the turnaround. It was pretty well received.
Very well received. I've played through the game myself, and
Elaborate.
I was just waiting for you, and it took everything that it learned from Sonic Unleashed. Sega turned that and just made everything tighter. For the most part, they fixed the camera issues. They kept Sonic's speed, but yet introduced a couple of new concepts, but really didn't lose any of the speed, and that's why it was so well received. Was because it finally got the speed right without sacrificing anything else.
Okay. I mean, it was just even a commercial success. The game, in the first 2 months of release, Sonic Colors sold almost 2 million units. So it started to mark a turnaround, and I was looking at this going, oh, finally a Sonic game that wasn't going to be a laughingstock. It
really was just a solidly done game. You can imagine a Colors 2 is going to come out.
I think so. But also, now that we're coming down to the final minutes here, while Sonic Colors was being made and promoted, we also had a lot of hype being generated for the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog 4, which would be the first true 3D game. It's a direct sequel to Sonic and Knuckles. It would be released on all platforms. And it would end up being released in episodic format.
Which was released in October 2010.
Sonic the Hedgehog 4. I downloaded it and was blown away. I was fanboying all over the place.
I still have yet to play it, unfortunately.
You're missing out.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's kind of this issue of money and system.
Money. Who needs it?
Well, I kind of don't have any of those systems.
Yeah, the whole lack of system thing. It was so. It finally was a return to form, and the thing of it was, now that this is an episodic series, downloadable, they can charge it at a much lower price, and we can still get our content's worth out of it.
Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 has 4 zones in it. It's 4 zones plus special stages.
3x a zone.
And I consider it a cock tease, personally, because Sega is wanting to milk this out for as long as possible. The problem is with the episodic format is that, okay, there was so much hype for Sonic 4 Episode 1. Now that it's been successful, it was a critical success, average score about an 8.5, so almost back to, Sonic 3 and Knuckles numbers. All that hype for Episode 1, and now not a peep on Episode 2.
Yeah, that kind of blows.
Yeah, they've been awfully quiet about it. You kind of have to wonder, are they gonna make a second episode? I have a hard time believing that they would just release the first Sonic 4 and just be like, yeah, good enough.
I
just think I think they're kind of gonna let this drag out, kind of like what Valve is doing to the Half-Life series.
Oh yeah.
and they're just gonna release it when they're good and ready.
Well, I hope they get good and ready soon. I mean, it's only 4 zones.
Well, true, but wouldn't you rather have something that they took their time with and actually get it right, or have another repeat of all the previous?
No, I agree.
Sonic
I think
games.
if they're going to do it, they should do it right. But at least I would like to hear at least a piece of news.
Well, you have to remember that they kind of teased it a year before its release. It got pushed back twice. From its initial release, but ultimately the wait was worth it. And Sega is going to make sure that everything that they do, to restructure Sonic's image, they're going to have to make sure they get this right. So, At this point, slow and steady wins the race. In the meantime, they came out with Sonic Colors. It did well. You can bet they're going to make another. You could bet that they're going to team up with Mario again for Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games.
Although those didn't do well.
Those didn't do well, but they were still fun.
I was just very glad to see Sonic returning to form, finally.
I think we all were. Anybody who's grown up with the original, Genesis games had a sigh of relief.
And the younger population, who probably doesn't care as much, really should, take notice about this and should give it a shot. Play these recent games if they haven't already, and just realize, what we grew up with, and realize that Sonic was good and now is getting back good.
Yeah,
I hope so. Considering the fact that Sonic 4 is the first Sonic game that takes full advantage of the graphic capabilities of the 360 and the PS3. You can play it in up to 1080p high definition. It's the first Sonic game to do that.
Woohoo!
So, I mean...
Well, what about Sonic 06? They did take advantage of the graphical capabilities. That was probably the only bright point of this game.
it might have been. I mean, I did download Sonic 4 for both the Wii and the PS3.
Because you love giving Sega your money.
They need it, really.
They do. If we're gonna get any more Hedgehog action, they need.
That is true.
And yeah. Just yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to see Sonic 4 Episode 2. And like I said, I just want to hear a piece of news about it, because after Episode 1 came out, Sega has dropped off the face of the earth.
Well, they've been busy. Oh wait, it's already out. Sonic Freeriders, which is a Kinect game for the 360, but Sega's been working on other games, really. And they kind of put Sonic on the side for now.
Well, piss off.
I don't know what else to tell you. That's what I read on the Daily News.
I just want to hear that they're working on Episode 2. I don't want to wait another year for it.
They might just be keeping, everything under wraps. You don't know.
And given the success of the first episode, they're probably, because all of Episode 1, for those who haven't played it, it's just an entire nostalgia trip through the previous Sonic games. They're probably trying to dig up more Sonic relics at this point.
I think they're trying to do right by us this time.
Which,
so.
They're going to make a Sandopolis zone, and I'm going to have to hurt them.
Sandopolis Nightmare Part 2.
At least, no, wait, they already kind of did a labyrinth zone in episode 1, so, you know.
Son of a bitch.
I've already drowned like 5 times in that. The good news is that you can get over 100 lives and you won't care. That was a life.
Yes, in Sonic 4, extra lives are very, very easy to come by.
Thank you, Casino Zone.
Oh God. But there you have it. I mean, we get Sonic the Hedgehog back in the early 90s. Starts off strong. Great war between Nintendo and Sega. Then Sega tries to get too fancy with its Hedgehog and results in Sonic spending years getting kicked, punched,
begging at the street corner for rings.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
rings for Speed, man.
And since the last 2 major Sonic games, Sonic Color and Sonic 4, it looks as if Sonic might be on the rebound, and it is my hope that he gets back to form again and stays there.
And it only took almost 20 years to do it.
Yeah, he had a 16-year hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
Really, 16 year?
It took 16 years between Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic 4.
Ah, gotcha.
So
mm-hmm.
that about wraps it up. So for Nick and Danielle and Sonic, wherever he may be, have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, take care, guys.